Released in May 2004, Van Helsing for the PlayStation 2 was developed by Sapphire Corporation and published by Vivendi Universal Games. The game ties into the film of the same name, directed by Steven Sommers, and features Hugh Jackman reprising his role as the titular character. Set in a gothic world of monsters, demons, and vampires, the game attempts to deliver a cinematic action-adventure experience. However, while there are moments where it shines, Van Helsing often struggles to distinguish itself in an era crowded with games of similar ambition, particularly those in the action-adventure genre. Sapphire Corporation, an American game development studio, led the creation of Van Helsing. The studio had previously worked on smaller-scale projects like Barbarian for the PS2 and Xena, Warrior Princess on the PlayStation. Neither of these titles reached critical acclaim, but they established Sapphire as a developer that focused on licensed properties and action-adventure titles. Vivendi Universal, the publisher, was known for a diverse portfolio, from platformers like Crash Bandicoot to more mature titles like The Chronicles of Riddick, Escape from Butcher Bay. Their backing ensured that Van Helsing would be a high-profile release timed to coincide with the film's premiere. The development of Van Helsing clearly drew inspiration from the film's gothic atmosphere and monster-laden world. However, it is equally clear that the game's design drew heavily from Devil May Cry, DMC, Capcom's acclaimed action-adventure title, which had set the standard for fast-paced, combo-driven combat. Released in 2001, Devil May Cry established a template that many action-adventure games of the early 2000s would follow, and Van Helsing was no exception. The development team took elements from Devil May Cry, notably the combat mechanics, upgrade system, and even some of the level design philosophy, and integrated them into their vision of monster hunting action. However, Van Helsing struggles to match the fluidity and finesse of DMC, coming across as a derivative but serviceable imitation. The influence of Devil May Cry on Van Helsing is immediately apparent from the combat mechanics. In DMC, players control Dante, a demon hunter with a fluid combat style that combines swordplay and gunplay, all while stringing together combos for maximum damage. Van Helsing mirrors this, giving players control over the eponymous monster hunter, who is similarly armed with a combination of ranged and melee weapons. Van Helsing's dual pistols, for example, clearly mirror Dante's signature pistols, Ebony and Ivory, while the game encourages players to chain combos between ranged and melee attacks for better rewards.
The movement in Van Helsing also feels like a more measured version of DMC's acrobatics. While Van Helsing does not have the aerial maneuvers of Dante, his ability to dodge, shoot, and swing his weapon feels like a slower, less precise echo of DMC's fast-paced combat system. There's even a style rating system in Van Helsing that rewards players for pulling off longer combos without getting hit, another feature lifted straight from Devil May Cry. While it can be fun to engage in combat against hordes of enemies using these mechanics, the game's combat lacks the tightness and responsiveness that made DMC such a classic. Controls in Van Helsing are not as refined, with some sluggishness in movement and attack execution that detracts from the overall experience. Gameplay-wise, Van Helsing is straightforward hack-and-slash action. Players move through linear levels, fighting enemies, solving light puzzles, and occasionally battling bosses. The levels, set in various gothic locations inspired by the film, are generally well designed in terms of atmosphere. Even if the structure can feel a bit repetitive, combat is the main draw, and while it lacks the depth of Devil May Cry, Van Helsing does manage to keep things somewhat engaging through its weapon upgrade system. Throughout the game, players can acquire new weapons and abilities by collecting glyphs, the game's currency. Weapons include crossbows, pistols, a shotgun, and other fantastical creations, all of which can be upgraded to increase damage, firing speed, or unlock new abilities. The crossbow, for instance, can be upgraded to fire electric bolts, giving it extra utility in combat. This upgrade system adds a layer of strategy, as players must decide which weapons and abilities to prioritize based on their playstyle. Some weapons are more effective against specific enemies, forcing players to experiment and find the most effective loadout for each situation. Van Helsing also has a series of special abilities that can be unlocked through progression. These range from enhanced dodges to new melee moves that help to diversify combat. However, these abilities often feel underutilized. While it is possible to execute more complex combos, the game rarely requires it. As a result, many players may find themselves relying on the same basic moves throughout most of the game.
One area where Van Helsing succeeds is in its atmosphere. The game is set in a gothic, monster-infested version of 19th century Europe, and the environments reflect this aesthetic beautifully. Castles, dark forests, and decrepit villages are brought to life with moody lighting and detailed textures. For a PS2 title, Van Helsing features some stunning visual moments, especially when it comes to the architecture and background design. The eerie castles and fog-laden forests ooze atmosphere, and the developers did an excellent job of recreating the feel of the film's dark, supernatural world. That said, the game's visual quality is somewhat inconsistent. While the environments are well crafted, character models can look blocky and stiff, especially when compared to the fluid animation seen in other PS2 games of the era. Van Helsing himself is well designed, but the enemies, particularly the generic werewolves and vampires, often feel uninspired and repetitive. Boss fights, such as the encounters with Dracula's brides, fare better in terms of visual design, with some impressive creature effects that stand out amidst the otherwise lackluster enemy designs. As a licensed game, Van Helsing attempts to remain faithful to the film's plot and atmosphere, albeit with some necessary changes to fit the format of a video game. Players will find themselves following a narrative that loosely mirrors the film, as Van Helsing battles Dracula, the Wolfman, and other iconic monsters. Hugh Jackman's likeness is used for the protagonist, and while Jackman did not provide his voice for the game, the stand-in voice actor does a respectable job of capturing the character's stoic, action hero persona. The game incorporates many of the film's key locations and characters, but it also takes creative liberties to expand the world. For instance, players will explore new areas and fight additional enemies not seen in the film, which helps flesh out the experience. In some ways, this makes the game feel like a natural extension of the film, offering fans the chance to experience more of the Van Helsing universe. However, the game's story feels somewhat shallow compared to the film's, and without the cinematic flair of Jackman's performance or the film's blockbuster set pieces, the narrative often feels like an afterthought.
One interesting bit of trivia about the development of Van Helsing is that it was originally conceived as a multi-platform release, with versions planned for the PlayStation 2, Xbox, and GameCube. However, the GameCube version was cancelled midway through development, possibly due to budget constraints or market considerations. This left the game as a PlayStation 2 and Xbox title. Another point worth mentioning is that Van Helsing includes some unlockable content, such as concept art and movie stills, which can be earned by completing challenges throughout the game. These extras don't add much to the gameplay experience, but they provide a nice bonus for fans of the film who want to explore more of the creative process behind both the movie and the game. In conclusion, Van Helsing for PS2 is a competent but ultimately derivative action game that borrows heavily from more successful titles like Devil May Cry. While it features atmospheric environments and some visually striking moments, the gameplay never quite reaches the heights it aspires to. The combat, though enjoyable at times, lacks the depth and fluidity of the games it attempts to emulate. Fans of the film may enjoy the chance to step into Van Helsing's shoes and battle iconic monsters, but those looking for a truly innovative or polished experience may be left wanting. Despite its flaws, Van Helsing has moments of enjoyment, particularly for players who appreciate gothic settings and straightforward, hack-and-slash gameplay. However, it never manages to escape the shadow of its influences, making it a decent but unremarkable entry in the PS2's action-adventure library.